I'm gonna record to this computer for right now. Okay. So this is Trans 101 for the SCA. Transgender 101 for the SCA. I've started presenting this class about 3 years ago. First time I did it was at a Scribing and Imbibing that the Barony of Ayrton hosts. I hosted at Penzic in 2018 twice, which is still kind of questionable why I did that, but especially because it was my first Penzic. But yeah. So for those who don't know me, which I think all of you do because you followed the link, or most of you have met me except for Jennifer, I think, maybe we met at Penzic, I'm not sure.
Oh no, I've never in my 20 years been to Penzic, but next year.
Awesome. For those who don't know me, which like I said, I know most of you do, I am Thane Samson Muscovich. Most people just call me Sammy, which I tend to respond to more. I am one of the two landed barons of the Barony of Carrigbon, which is in the Middle Kingdom, and we're basically on the western border. So, general disclaimer for this class, this is basically intended to provide a baseline of knowledge for the general public and allies. Any person who is considering gender transition in any form should really speak to their medical and or mental health care team for further information. Side note to the disclaimer, if I can provide resources, I will try to do so, but take it as it is. So the basics. So defining sex and gender. Sex is going to be your biological assignment at birth. Typically, males are going to be people who are classified as those who produce sperm. They have facial and body hair as secondary characteristics that develop at puberty. Those who are defined as female are usually going to be individuals who produce eggs, and then they develop breast tissue as secondary sex characteristics as puberty hits. And then there's also a third classification of folks who are intersex, and they're born, those folks possess characteristics of both. They're often assigned a gender representation based on genital representation at birth. And then they may undergo genital reconstruction surgery shortly after birth at the will of the parents for representation of male or female. So in the last decade, there's been a strong push for folks to not have those infants undergo the surgery, and basically let them develop as individuals so that they have a sense of identity and a sense of autonomy that comes naturally to them. Because ultimately, I'd have to go back and find the study, but there was one done where basically these people were, say, somebody was born intersex, they were assigned as female and had basically gender confirmation surgery as an infant without their consent, and then I'm actually identifying as male. And the same for folks that were that did not have surgery and identify as male because of peer pressure, societal pressure, parental pressure, and then later in life they're like, no, actually I'm female. So it's
made the wrong decision.
Yes, basically the parents made a 50-50 choice. The parents and the doctors made a 50-50 choice, and it was the wrong choice. So there's been, like I said, there's been a push in the last decade to not do any sort of surgery because it's essentially mutilating the child, and allowing that child to develop as a person and letting them live out a happier life. So that's been more towards what that's been trending as. I don't know if there are any particular laws against it at this point. I believe a couple of states do have them, but I'm not entirely certain. I'd have to double check that and clarify. So on the flip side, there's gender. So gender is going to be your traditional social construct based on perception. So males are typically perceived as being strong, brave, muscular, all those things where it's like, I'm the hero, I'm going to go save somebody, and very rah, 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 very, machismo. And then you have females, which are typecast, because I also have an acting background. They're essentially typecast as being docile, quiet, doe-like, very demure, virginal almost, and very, clutch my pearls. And that's going to be they're both stereotypes, essentially. Gender identity, then, is going to exist on a spectrum. So it ranges anywhere from hypermasculine, which you have that very strong machismo, and to feminine, which is you do have those folks that espouse both of those extremes, and it can range anywhere from in between or just not at all. You have somebody that's gender fluid, that person's day-to-day identity is going to fluctuate between male, female, or anywhere in between, combination thereof or lack thereof. It really is kind of depending on how they wish to interpret their identity at that point. And that's totally fine, whatever. They're a person and that's awesome. And then you have non-binary. That person's day-to-day identity is going to include aspects of both or neither, those masculine and feminine traits and roles. And it's really ultimately what makes them feel most comfortable as a person and makes them feel most whole. So we've got all these definitions. What's transgender then, right? So simply stated, a person who is transgender, their gender identity and their physical body are going to be out of sync. For example, somebody can identify as masculine while having secondary sex characteristics of a female. If you've never met me before, hi, that's me. Please note that transitioning is an individual experience, and it's very unique to that person. Like, my transition experience is going to be different than some other person's. And even if we're both transmasculine, how we identify ourselves, how we are, like, and the methods that we use to affirm our identity may be completely different. It completely depends on the person. Not everyone who identifies as transgender or gender nonconforming is able to or wishes to access appropriate clinical care. So that said, somebody may or may not be able to have surgery, they may not be able to take hormones, but it doesn't make them any less valid as a person. So just keep that in mind. So for the basics, are there any questions? Nope. Good. Cool. So bear in mind, for those who have just joined us, if folks do have questions, feel free to ask them. This is an open forum. Feel free to say, hey, Sammy, I got a question, or just ask it. I'm pretty good at listening to multiple threads. I usually have to listen to 7 different radio channels at work. I think I can handle this a little bit. So going on to interactions. Interactions are basically how we interact with everyone. How somebody walks, how they talk, how they interact with another person. These are all indicators to how we interact with people, or how we may approach someone. Is someone tightly, are they tightly bound up? Are they super tense? Are they very relaxed? Are their eyes darting about? Like, all of these things give us indicators, or how they're dressed, how they speak. So many things define, like, how, if we're going to introduce ourselves to somebody, how we approach them and how we introduce ourselves to them, or how, that interaction may flow. So in terms of appearances, trans and gender nonconforming individuals may or may not wear clothing in line with their gender identity. A lot of this is honestly going to depend on what state you live and where you're at in the world. In Illinois, in the Midwest, which, I can't really speak to Eatonville. I think you're from Arizona, Jennifer. Like, depending on where you're at in your specific states, like, you have little pockets too. Like, for a long time, for my, case in point for me, I lived in Kankakee, which is south of I-80. For those of you who are familiar with Illinois geography, it's pretty conservative, and there's also some stuff too where, like, I'm related to half the town, and that whole transition to male there would have been completely different had I transitioned there as opposed to where I am now. Regardless, anyone who's transitioning or identifying as anything other than the gender binary, they're going to be the same people that love and respect prior to the transition. And especially if they're new, and the other thing too to keep in mind is, especially if someone's newly out or starting to explore their gender identity, it's often a huge display of trust for that person to present their authentic self at an event. This is the opportunity that we all have as members of the populace at large to be a leader and to be that shining example of a peer, even if you're not a peer or a noble or a royal or what have you. Basically, you're going to treat that person no differently. They are no different. It's like, since I've been in the society, I've met several people who have started their transition journey, and it's been really cool to watch them become more confident in themselves, because they're exploring, they're trying to figure out, wait, I've been told all these things by society, wait, I don't have to pay attention to this, and I can just be me. And it's been really, really cool to watch them blossom. And I've seen this multiple times, from everyone on that spectrum, whether they're newly identifying as non-binary or gender fluid, or if they're transitioning from male to female, female to male, anywhere on that spectrum. It's been really, really cool to watch them gain that confidence of self. And one of the wonderful things, of course, as you all know about the SCA, is that we're an incredibly open and accepting place. The people we're rooted in research, so we ask a lot of questions, but then we also, obviously, as we've seen the last week, we remain open to change and trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to navigate this? And it's almost like at the flip of a switch, and it's really cool to watch. And we're courteous. That's the other thing too. We're pretty courteous about how we interact with people. There's some language stuff which we'll get into in a moment with the forms of address, but overall it's really cool. So there are a couple things that we don't ask though, and for a few reasons. So we don't ask people if they've had the surgery or similar questions related to their transition. And like I said, there's a couple reasons. One, it violates patient privacy laws. So just don't ask them. And then also violates the SCA's non-discrimination policy. So the easiest thing to do is just don't ask. Like, unless you're having a dialogue with someone, they're approaching you in confidence and saying, hey, can I ask you a question about this? With the caveat that, hey, this is my experience. It may not be the same for you, but this is mine, and here's where I can jump you off and provide you a resource, or here's a location I can give you for that. So, yeah. I'm talking a lot, I'm sorry, and I'm trying to pace myself.
Drink some water.
I am. I'm drinking water.
Pause, drink.
Right?
Oh yeah, Warhammer. Okay, I see how
Nope.
it is.
Cool
Warcraft,
cup.
actually.
Cool cup.
Warcraft. I just see the warrior. Your hand was in the way.
Yep, because I love the Lich King, so I made sure I got it. Is mine. Is it precious?
Yeah, you're only a bear, not a king, so.
Yeah, well, Arthas is kind of an awesome dude in his own right. But anyways, so forms of address. This is going to be really, in the forms of address leads into court etiquette. So forms of address generally for when you're interacting with folks, there's 3 basic sets of pronouns. And I only provide the 3 basic ones because depending on the person, they may have a set of pronouns that they specifically use. Just ask them if you're not sure. So basic sets of pronouns for masculine, he, him, his, feminine, she, her, and hers, and neutral, they, them, and theirs. Like I said, a person may use a different set of pronouns. I do know several people who use she, share, and theirs, but again, it's individual to that person, and we try and respect them, as we're able. And I know that mistakes happen. We'll get into that in just a moment. So if you're not sure about a person's pronouns, ask them. Pardon me. So a lot of trans and gender nonconforming folks would honestly rather you would ask instead of assuming. It's a sign of respect. Just saying, one of the ways that I like to handle that is, I'm Thane Sammy of Carrigbon. My pronouns are he, him, and his. How may I address you? And the reason why I choose to introduce myself like that is because it allows people the agency to. It allows the agency to define themselves. Hey, R2. Welcome back. Oh, maybe. He blipped a little bit. I think he'll be back. But anyways, so it allows people the agency to define themselves, which just reinforces that concept of personhood and that concept of the individual.
I have a quick question.
Sure, go for it.
You might cover, but I just want to ask it before I forget. I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
If you don't have the opportunity to ask somebody, like if you're referring to them to somebody else, is they, them, they're still a neutral?
Yes.
That is not offensive.
Yep. So general conversation, if I'm not sure about the gender of somebody, which I've started incorporating this actually into my day-to-day life as a dispatcher.
Mhm.
is I use they, them, and theirs. I use that pronoun a lot. I use the singular they a lot at work, just because like I do have gender nonconforming and trans students on campus, and I don't know who they are. So if I'm talking about somebody, like kind of as a segue, I had a call where I had a trans woman who was quite a medical issue, and we rolled medics and everything, but I have to give out information over the radio. I'm required to give information out over the radio to my officer. And one of the nice things that my university does is they have a section for a preferred name. So if somebody is transitioning and they would like their professor to use the correct name for them, they can put that in there, and then the professor uses it, or whoever will use that name.
Mhm.
So it's a really So it's a really cool option. There's a whole nother section on gender, which I still am kind of fighting with the university about, but that's neither here nor there for right now. But in this medical call, I'm able to look up the person's information, and I have to run them by their legal name, which is, I as being the person who ran them and being a trans person, I had some reservations about that. But the way I handled it is I called my officer and I let the officer know via phone, hey, person's pronouns are she, her, and hers. Just so you're aware, I'm going to put the information out as neutral over the radio in case you don't have the earpiece in, because I want to respect that person's identity. So how I did is, like, I said your subject is clear, valid out of wherever, and here's the descriptors for them, because I have to give that information out.
Mhm.
And because I chose to give my officer the additional information without compromising the student's identity or safety, I was able to handle it that way. A little extra work on my end, but it made sure I wanted to not make an uncomfortable situation for that student even more uncomfortable. So, I mean, that's unfortunately not our department procedure and policy, but we're working on that. we have much bigger things to worry about at the moment. So
Now, question for you, real quick. If in the SCA, if we approach a person, let's just say fighting rapier and everything like that, or whatever fighting skill, and they appear masculine, is it offensive to use him, her, or his, or his?
So I would advise to try and use gender neutral pronouns or gender neutral address as much as possible. Like I said a few minutes ago, like identifying yourself, saying, especially if you don't know the person, hi, I'm such and such, my pronouns are he, him, his, or hey, I'm such and such, how may I address you? Even if you don't provide your pronouns, if you are very obviously identifying on either end of the spectrum, offering that person the opportunity to identify themselves basically gives you that space, and gives them that space to say, yeah, no, I'm not. Because I can tell you, I know a lot of female rapier fighters who dress masculine, because honestly, moving in a skirt's pain in the butt. I'm trying to censor my language because I know that there may be kids that watch this later. But seriously though, I mean, I know that people, and what have you, or like I mentioned earlier, they may, maybe the site is in a location where it's not as open and accepting, and they're trying to not draw undue attention to themselves. I mean, even in the confines of the SCA, I mean, they still, I don't know, people have different ways that they dress up in garb and whatever, like whether they pre-dress or they dress on site. But for safety reasons, like, for personal safety reasons, that I kind of hope that answers your question.
Yeah, well, I'm just because there is a camaraderie within rapier fighters, and you know that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so to try to show your respect to your opponent, I don't want to offend anyone, but I don't want to get personal and say, okay, are you transgender? Because, like, for example, in your case, I've known you for many years, and that's never come up in your and I's conversation at all.
Right. I mean, and again, for me specifically, like, I came into the SCA having already started my transition process. So everyone except for one or two people in the SCA, like literally, I think Sabah is the only one in the SCA who knew me prior to me transitioning, and the person that brought me into the SCA. So there's like two people that have known me longer than I've been in the SCA, that knew me as female, which there hasn't been much difference because most of that time has been me trying to figure out like where my gender identity was. You know, at one point, like I was identified as gender fluid and everything, and you know, while I was trying to figure that out, but I mean, it's honestly easier just to say, you know, because yeah, and even on the heavy list too, we had that camaraderie, and in the
Exactly.
EMS community as well, there's that camaraderie as well. Like, hey, that's really cool. Can I talk to you about that? And honestly, just, you know, giving the person that agency of saying, hey, can I know your name? Or, hey, can I introduce myself to you? Like having that bridge is really going to be the best thing. Because ultimately you want to know your opponent's name, right?
Exactly. I mean, you know, and then that's the thing. Now, on non-SCA, it's kind of interesting you're doing this class today because I'm in a sociology class at the SIUE called Gender and Society, and
Awesome.
chapter 2 that we're going over in the week 2 of week 8 is actually it is having to do just with transgender people. Week 2 is all the social construction of gender relations.
Yep.
So it just
yeah.
kind of interesting that the beginning of this week you're doing this on Saturday, which most of us don't have anything to do anyway because we're stuck at university wise, you know, we're stuck at home. But it is kind of, and I'm very glad, and I thank you for doing that because it gives me an idea. Because I did download the notes that you guys had online for
Awesome.
what you're reading word for word, going down the thing.
Yeah.
But that's why I'm glad I was able to do this because it does help me in that regards. Because I don't deal a lot with the transgender, but the most area is the SCA. But
Right.
not you specifically. I'm talking about other people.
Right.
You, like I said, I had no, you know, it was just barren and barren. You know, it's not, you know,
So and also too, like, you know, yeah, kind of on that note about like asking somebody if they're trans. Don't again, it kind of falls into that. Don't do it.
Yeah, I know that's the thing, and that's the thing. You know, you kind of suspect, but you don't want to insult anybody.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the easiest way to find out somebody like and find out who somebody is just ask them, hey, you know, who are you? You know, may I introduce myself to you? Because, like I said, it allows a person to give them the agency and it allows them to kind of feel a person out and say, okay, is this person going to be safe? Is this person not going to be safe? You know, in a non-SCA context, I had a coworker, which, you know, I've been at my current job almost 5 years. I've been legally noted on my ID as male since 2012, so long before I even started this job. And most of my coworkers know I'm trans. And I have no, but there was one coworker that because I do not trust this person. I didn't add them on Facebook. I don't have any association with them outside of work whatsoever. And I just didn't trust them because super conservative and older. And I was like, nope. And they said some things during work where I'm just kind of like, yeah, you're not safe. I'm just gonna come in, do my job, and if I have to work with you, and then go home. But most of my other coworkers I do trust, and that's come in kind of handy too. A couple times with work, where I've had a couple of my officers come and ask me, hey, we have this person who we know is trans. How do I interact with them? How does interaction?
Right.
So, and I don't mind being that touch point for my people because, you know, in my day-to-day life, I'm out. There's no risk. There's very minimal risk to me. I mean, realistically, I'm a nearly 6 foot tall, 300-pound black dude. Most people are going to practice social distancing with me anyway, just because of appearances. Even though really, I'm a big teddy bear.
I'm the white version of that. So, you know, 6 foot, 300.
Right. So, but because of that perception though, like one of the things I very strongly feel about is I feel very strongly about educating people and offering, you know, I will be trans Yoda. I have no problem being that because you guys laugh, but it's true though. Like I have a lot of people that I've been introduced to a lot of people who are transitioning either or exploring their gender identity, and they're saying, "Hey, go meet Sammy," because they know that I'm out and I have no problem talking about some of the things, and I'll adjust my language and how and what level of conversation I have depending on the age of the person. There's, at Valde, I got introduced to a couple of youth that are exploring their gender. And one, I thought that was really cool because that's awesome. I think it's really awesome that the parents are trying to be really supportive of their children, and that's so important. And again, goes back to the whole concept of community and respecting each other's autonomy, as is the whole core of what we do in the SCA. But yeah, so going forward though, if somebody, so like, let's say that Monster, I'm going to pick on you because I know that you're because I like picking on you. So let's say
helper.
So let's say
hey Chad, what's going on?
So let's say that I don't know Monster, and I just see this person in this really cool Reaver kit, takes off, before he takes off his helmet, takes off his gauntlets. I see fingernail polish. Now, because of social conditioning, which is awesome, because of social conditioning, most people are going to think, oh, that person's female, even before the helmet takes off. Let's say you're fighting rapier. It's a mask. You can't really tell. You take off the thing. There's nail polish. Oh, that person's female. Most people are going to trip that signal. So if Monster's getting ready to go fight something else, but just is getting ready to switch gear, I don't know who this person is. I'm going to go introduce them. Hey, but they were a really good fight. I'm going to go and ask, hey, hey, my name's Sammy. That was a great fight. How may I address you? Supposing that Monster, or generally that's how I would do it, but like most people are like, hey man, that was a really great fight. What's your name? That's how going to be the first thing out of people's mouths because of the conditioning we've had socially. Monster pops his helm. He's got a full beard and goatee. Person's gonna freeze and go, buh, and deer in headlights look. So a couple of things with that. One, Monster's probably gonna say, hey, my name's Chad. Pronouns are he, him, and his, right? Or, So
My name is Monster, you pronounce it ass.
Okay, it's a different pronoun, different name. So
Is ass gender neutral?
yes. And a fine one at that.
That's our part of the gender. That's all. Okay.
But still, Monster's then provided a different name and pronouns than what I'm expecting. So how do you handle that? Because most people are going to go deer in headlights, but how does? So honestly, you're just going to same thing we do when we adopt a pet, or same thing we do when we adopt a pet. Let's say you go to the shelter, because shelter animals are awesome. You adopt this really fluffy kitty that's named Robert, because it's something on top of my head. Why not? So fluffy kitty is named Robert. And Gwen, I'm thinking specifically of your cat because the cloud. And you get home and like Robert really doesn't seem to fit this cat. That's not the personality. This cat's fluffy, kind of graceful, and just floof, 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 happy. Let's say you want to name the cat Nimbus after the cloud, or Cumulus, whatever. But Nimbus because it's whatever. So no, I'm going to rename this cat Nimbus. So you start training your brain. This cat's name is Nimbus. Doesn't matter the gender. Cat's name is Nimbus. It's that simple. And most people, and I try and relate it to that because people don't really think about it in that term. Or somebody develops a nickname. We all know Chad is Duncan, and that's his SCA name, but we all call him Monster because that's his nickname and that's what he prefers to go by. So it's that whole thing too, where it's kind of almost like it's not quite the same as a nickname, but it's that we almost need to take the whole concept of names and the whole concept of names is similarly to that, where it's, hey, there's this person, okay, that's what their name is, and that's what they're telling me. If you do mess up, because you will, inevitably you will, especially if you've known somebody prior to them starting to explore their gender identity, you may screw up. It's going to happen. The easiest way to handle that, honestly, is don't make a huge deal out of it, either with calling them the wrong name or with the wrong the wrong pronouns. Just apologize and keep moving. So the other thing too, like I keep going back to that whole concept of safety, especially because depending on where you are in the known world, safety can be an issue. putting out there, Gulf Wars is never going to be on my list of places to go because of safety, for multiple reasons. But using them as an example, going down to rural Mississippi, I'm going to feel substantially less safe than if I'm going to Madison or Milwaukee or Columbus, or if I'm going to Tucson, or any place in, you know, that's a major city or that's going to be more liberal in their thinking. So it could basically it could, if you call attention to a mistake, it could potentially endanger that person depending on where their surroundings are. So just something to keep in mind. And that's one of the reasons why we don't really make a big deal. Just, okay, acknowledge, say, hey, sorry about that, and correct, and just move on. So, yeah. So, and the other thing with that is just make a point of trying to use that person's correct pronouns and name going forward. The other thing I mentioned that because we are all a fan, we're, you know, in the SCA, we're a huge fan of no shit, there I was. You know, we're a fan of the big story. Monster, I'm looking directly at you at this one too, because I know you're a storyteller. Even though you don't consider yourself a bard, you totally are. But
I acknowledge that's my art.
Bard with the stick.
half of us are, let's be honest.
Bard.
But realistically though, like those of us who are storytellers and who sing songs, you know, if you're telling a story about a person's past, use the current gender pronouns and their name, because it's that whole, and it's like, I understand, and one of the questions I've gotten in the past is, well, what if this person did this in the past and it was specifically related because of that gender? Does not matter. Still use the current pronouns and gender. You know, it's one of the ways that you train your brain to it becomes muscle memory essentially. You know, it basically tells your lizard brain, no, this person is named this, and it rolls off the tongue at that point. It's just training at that point. Just like we practice on the Pell, or just like we practice point control. Case in point, you've got the Myers square up there, monster. You know, it doesn't matter. We keep practicing those things so that we get good at them, and they become muscle memory. So that, like, when you are in that press in the melee field, or maybe you are in that tournament situation, you're not thinking, you're just doing. Same thing. Practice, 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 practice. So, we have a nice diverse set of people here, which is awesome. We've got some court heralds, we've got, you know, some former and current landeds, and we've got folks who are, I believe, on Curia in their kingdom, maybe. But we've got a very wide swath of people who do a lot of very different things related to the court process, which is really cool. So, for those of you who are heralds, this is going to be, or you know, or people who are involved in the speaking component of court, this is going to be really important, and also the scribal component as well. So for court, you're going to use the pronouns or form of address that most closely aligns with the person's gender identity. And this is one of those things where Facebook is a wonderful, wonderful resource. Use it. If you don't know a person, do research. We are an organization founded on research. Yo.
Quick question. What's the difference between research and stalking? Asking for a friend.
Research is when you're doing it for their benefit. Stalking is when you're doing it for your benefit.
Yes.
I'll accept it.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Allow
intent.
it. I'll allow it.
Bravo. Bravo.
Yes. One will not get. Well, it also depends on the point of contact too. But
Okay,
you know,
we're
generally,
also a monster too, so you know.
well, yeah, but generally speaking, it's going to be whose benefit is it for, as Monster pointed out. So, especially for those of you who are doing scroll work, or if you're doing Scribble, or if you're submitting awards, even research your people. Like I'm not gonna lie, there's been some people I've added on Facebook just for the sole purpose of, you have all your stuff private, and I need to get information about you for a scroll. And by the way, you seem like a really cool person.
I'm going to be guilty of that.
Oh, I'm totally guilty of it. And
Totally guilty of that.
I fully admit that. But, and also too, it's kind of a cool way too, is now as a landed, where I can kind of get to know my populace a little bit better. Or the people that are surrounding our area. It's kind of cool. But also people don't tend to lock down their Facebooks very well. But anyways, though, So moving forward, so specifically on the scrolls that we do, and then also the court address, the College of Heralds back in July of 2018 approved gender-neutral forms of address, which was a huge thing. Like, they are documented to period, and we use them. We use Armiger and we use Noble, and I think that there's a third one, but I'm forgetting it at the moment. Armiger, Noble, and I think, but those are the two primary ones that we use.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat those?
Armiger and Noble. So, one of the things that Edmund and Katrin actually started doing, and now Scott and Inez are doing in our kingdom, is as they're calling somebody up for an award, while they're giving them that kind of moment of, hey, we're recognizing you for this, because that's kind of a nice personal touch that they chose to do, and I know that Seto and Inez are now doing too, is we're giving you this award for this reason, and whatever, yada yada. They're also asking them, how would you like to be addressed? When and the only reason I know this is because I received an award of the Sapphire for the Middle Kingdom back last summer. So I got to experience that firsthand, where they asked me, how would you like to be addressed? And even though it didn't really, it's not a huge deal for me right now, because I'm very firm in my gender identity. One of my Barony members also got called up during the same court. And the fact that he was able to determine with the crown, this is how I wish to be addressed. When he was receiving, it was his first award that he was receiving in our king, his first kingdom level award for the mid realm. He was previously in, I'm forgetting where he came from, but he's
Somewhere else.
yes, somewhere else. He was receiving his first kingdom award, and that was a huge thing because the crown saw him as a person, and that's a big deal. It's a huge deal because
You said something about asking, and I just wanted to throw out there too, as a fellow landed, the whole don't assume if you know one thing about it, don't assume that all the other things are the same. I had one gentle who said I addressed them as Lord, and then later found out they preferred they them pronouns, and I said my apologies, and they said no, Lord is the title of address that I would like, but yes, the they them pronouns then.
Yep.
And I said, that's fine. Whatever it is that you want is what I should be using.
Yep. And kind of calling to that whole, pop culture reference, where in Avatar, you have the Na'vi who is meeting the Avatar, and that whole concept of I see you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that is. It's basically saying I recognize you as one of mine, and I recognize you as a person. I recognize you as my equal.
I have the respect for you that I want to follow what you are comfortable with.
Correct. And again, that goes back to, again, for us in the SCA, that goes back to that concept of chivalry and respect and honor. All of those things that, are in that chivalric code that define who and what we, who we are and what we do. And yeah, so that's very, very important. So one of the things I do know in here is because I kept the Middle Kingdom one, because a lot of times I'm pretty limited in my travel right now. Pardon me, because of my work. Huh?
Aren't we all right now?
Right, but even more so because of my work situation, my work schedule's a thing. I'm able to pretty much go like within a 2.5, maybe 3 hour radius of where I live, which means I get up to North Shield. Sometimes I get over to Callantyre, just barely over the border, and I'm primarily stuck in the mid realm. Stuck, I say lovingly, because I do love.
I was going to say stuck. What?
No, I do love my kingdom. I'm very happy to be a resident of the Middle Kingdom, but I do put.
I hope you're happy in the mid realm, considering you're
right?
in the mid realm.
You talking about mid realm? Mid realm, not middle.
But anyways, so one of the things that, and this is where Sorcha, I'm gonna ask for confirmation on your end. That's why I called your name, so you can pipe up. So one of the things that we're really good about in the Middle Kingdom is that we provide the populace with the opportunity to have our order of precedence updated, and then we can also request updated scrolls to be created with the person's new SCA name and gender identity. I've seen that happen a couple of different times. For the order of precedence, I've contacted Kingdom and asked them to add a section for pronouns. I don't know if they've gotten a chance to do it yet. They've had some other things with, since we've since they did all of the updates to the new database and everything. But that was a thing that I requested, and it's something they are working on for a future update. So that's awesome. I know that North Shield does have an option for that, which is really, really cool. I have a profile on there because I post events sometimes because I like playing with you guys. So as far as updated scrolls, typically you can contact the Kingdom Backlog Signet, or you can commission a scribe. People have got a lot of downtime right now. Just pointing that out. If someone you know needs a scroll updated,
Good idea.
networking is good. Do I basically have that or?
Yeah, the only thing I would add actually is that we had the backlog deputy and I, because this came up sometime last year, I think, as if somebody comes to you and wants a scroll redone for that reason, because they've changed their gender, they changed their pronouns, they're not happy with what they had before, whatever, how far back are we going to correct those?
Okay.
Because if somebody's been in the SCA, no specific example, 15 years and they've got 10 awards.
Right.
No, we are not going back that far. The fact, take this how you will. The fact is, when you got your AOA 20 years ago, it said that is who you were at the time. We just don't have the time or the resources to do all of that. If they're, you know what I mean? It's just, it would be too much. But yes, if in the past 2-3 years, whatever, you've gotten a scroll, you're not happy with it, or you've transitioned, or you've changed your pronouns and the scroll is no longer correct, yes, you can come to the Dragon Signet, the backlog deputy, and they will redo it without question.
And to be fair, they can always commission somebody individually
Yep.
to do that for them.
Absolutely, they can. I'm talking from a more official perspective.
Right. So we can't necessarily expect the signets to take care of all of that backlog for that long a period of time. It makes sense. But there are individuals available to do that if you so choose.
Oh yeah, of course, yes.
Right. And like I said, lots of scribes are kind of going, man, I'm really bored. There's some really, I'm going to be the terrible person that's also going to hawk a friend. So I know that Countess Gwen from North Shield, she runs Artificers and Limners Guild. She's looking for commissions right now. She's a fantastic artist. Just saying, if you want to put that out there. And there's tons of other independent artists that are very much in the same boat that are looking for commissions to basically tide them over until all of this nonsense with the pandemic is over. So this is going to be one of those venues where, hey, support your independent and local and small businesses, because they're definitely going to need the help right now. And, plus we want to support our people in the SCA the best we can. So that, that being said, so I actually added your note about the 2 to 3 years backlog limit to my notes. So that'll be an update. That'll just be an update going forward. So that.
Oh, that's fine. And we just randomly, I'll be honest, we randomly decided that,
I mean,
it's just because it's more recent than saying like 20 years ago or what have you. And it's easy, and it's easier to look stuff up.
Right.
When you need to change.
I hear that. I mean, it's a lot easier from the logistics perspective. So if you're going through the Kingdom route, that's good to know.
Right. And obviously, of course, if you want something redone and you do it on your own, that's totally different. You can do obviously whatever you want.
Cool. So, like I said, commissioning a scribe is also an option, as we've said. So many of the Society's kingdoms, and I can talk, they offer similar services to the populace. The Kingdom Precedence Clerk, if you're outside of, I believe that North Shield also has a backlog signet as well.
Mm-hmm.
Not every kingdom does. There is a chart at the back of the known world notes of as of a year ago. I need to go back and update it. I really need to update this every 6 months because people's positions change and whatever. But I have like I said, as of a year ago, current list of who the backlog signets are and also who the precedence clerks are for each kingdom. And I did go actually and ask the in one of the known world Scribble groups, like, hey, who's your point of contact for this? Because this is why I'm asking. Because, like I said, I do this as an international class, as it were. It's basically a known world class, and I don't want it specifically to focus on the mid-realm, even though that is where I have most of my experience. Like I said, it does reference the Appendix 2, because we've also got some Calentiri in here as well. Even though you're on the border, William, so
Excuse me, I'm in the middle of Illinois. I'm not even close to Palantir. I'm in Springfield, Illinois.
Oh, my bad.
I'm Baroness Wars territory.
Gotcha. Well, you're close to Calentir's border, though. Close enough.
You're closer than I am.
Not really, but
because you got straight shot down to Davenport, and you'll be right there in Palantir territory. Correct?
Yeah, but it's only an hour or so from Springfield to St. Louis.
Hour and a half, actually. Yeah.
So you're closer. But
okay, so my household is a Palantir household. Okay.
Right. That's why I was referencing. It's like I knew that Rolling Thunder was from Palantir.
No. Rolling Thunder, Draco Thunder is from Palantir. Draco. Rolling Thunder is the big Thunder household of all the Thunder clans. Just Thunder history.
Gotcha. So speaking of history, we're actually
nice attention, wasn't it?
Yeah. Segues are a thing. So, but from all the procedural stuff that we have, are there any other questions? Cool. So we're going to move into history, which is actually my personal favorite part of the class. So history. So first we're going to start off by talking about some of the definitions and where the terminology came from, and then we're actually going to go into the chronological history of all the things. So this is, bear in mind too with this is a living document for me. I'm constantly doing research, especially now that I have a copious amount of free time in my world when I'm not playing Animal Crossing or Stardew Valley, or Pokemon. When I'm not playing video games or I'm not taking phone calls or radio traffic at work, I'm usually doing or classwork. I'm usually doing research. And I've still got a ton of resources, even just on my desktop, that I still need to read and go through and update, just because, life has been a little bit busy recently. So yeah, so history. So generally speaking, we didn't have terminology for the term trans, like as a prefix, until the late 1800s, early 1900s. So right when you're seeing the industrial and scientific revolution, that's when all these terms came about. Even though we've been doing science and technology pretty much the entire time that humans have roamed the world, we didn't really start developing the terminology for it until fairly recently. So, like I said, though, until the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was no clear definition of what defined being transgender. The term and definition itself did not exist until the late 1800s. So early scientists defined being transgender, gender nonconforming, as being mentally ill. Even in the Middle Ages, which we are fond of and we study, those folks were either, depending on what culture, you're looking at, they were either considered as mentally ill, they were disturbed, or they were a source of mysticism and wonder. It kind of depended on what culture you're looking at and where in the world you were. There's going to be few to no notes or documentation stating the reasons why somebody may have lived as the opposite gender or as an iteration of non-binary gender presentation during the period the SCA covers. For the purposes of this class, I define that as anything before 1650 Common Era. So anything from 1650 on earlier to the dawn of time, including the Dark Ages, or the caveman days. So everything in that lexicon is what we study. There is no early end, as defined by corpora, even though there's still conflict about that for some reason. So various cultures have different gender expressions, and they a lot of times just accepted people as they were. And we're going to get into that. Like the Egyptians had a pharaoh that was differently gendered, and the Hindi cultures have, the Hindi culture has a different concept of that as well, which, like I said, we'll get into that. So the other thing to keep in mind too with this, and as is the trouble with most research done on the Middle Ages and any time prior, is that modern history is most often going to be viewed through the lenses of Christianity and colonialism. They were the definitive world powers at that point. So a lot of the documentation that we have currently available to us is going to be written through that perspective. Hail to the victors and all that. Anyone who basically the victors of the war are the people who are going to be writing history. To quote Hamilton, "Who lives, who dies, who tells your story." So, but because of that glass, that perception, it makes it very difficult to do research, and it makes it difficult to decipher the intent of folks that that lived in that period, especially for those cultures outside the spectrum of Christianity. And when I say the spectrum of Christianity, that's the entire reference of like the Judeo-Christian lexicon. So by that I mean, but my brain is not working right now. So your standard Christianity from Europe, Judaism from Israel, the Muslim faith, they're all based in that it's the Abrahamic and basically the Abrahamic religions. All of those religions have some sort of base. So they have a very similar lens, even though they fight about it for some reason. I don't know. They basically all believe the same thing. But anyways, so going actually into the history component of it, so the farthest back reference we have currently is going to be in 1460 before Common Era. A note to that too, I don't use AD and BC. I do use Common Era and before Common Era because that is the standard that is being used currently in scientific circles, scientific and anthropological circles. Because yay for education. So in 1460 before Common Era, you had Hatshepsut. So Hatshepsut, when they became pharaoh, they took on a masculine role. They were born as female, raised as female. But when they assumed this role as pharaoh, they're like, no, I'm going to present myself as male. And so icons were created depicting pharaoh as male. So there was that where they had the iconography. It was very Hatshepsut, for all intents and purposes, when they ruled, they had one of the most successful reigns in Egypt, as has been documented. When they were addressing the public, they often wore detachable beard and male regalia. So, and we didn't live during that time, and I don't know. I would be really interested to find out, like through more research, if they bound or if they wore just full length coverings or how they handled the appearance of themselves. I mean, aside from having the beard, the traditional beard that we associate with Egyptian pharaohs, and whatnot. So more than likely, their gender presentation was going to be for political reasons. In one of the scholarly articles I read, it said that Hatshepsut also took a new name, Mot Kare. Sometimes translated as truth, which is Mot, is the soul, Ka, of the sun god Re. The key word here is Mot, the ancient Egyptian expression for order and justice as established by the gods. Maintaining and perpetuating Mot, which is truth, to ensure the prosperity and stability of the country required a legitimate pharaoh who could speak, as only pharaohs could, directly with the gods. By calling herself Mot Kare, Hatshepsut was likely reassuring her people that they had a legitimate ruler on the throne. So, like I said, that was from a scholarly article. I don't remember which one. It was from an anthropology magazine that had done an extensive article on Hatshepsut. But so not too long. So the other thing to know about Hatshepsut is that they had a son, and the son eventually, when the son came of age, there was also an uncle that was involved too with their. I think her brother, her husband's brother. Husband passed away. She came into power. Or they came into power rather, and then son came of age. Hatshepsut said, "Okay, Hatshepsut died. Person came of age and did their thing, had their progeny, and the uncle at one point was an advisor to the child, and sometime during that, all of the monuments were defaced because this person is female. There's not possibly a way that they can be a ruler, blah, blah, blah. And because of the fact that, carbon dating and whatnot, we're able to determine, oh, no, this is from this time period. Because as we know, the Egyptians had extensive records in the form of hieroglyphs and later through papyrus writing and whatnot and glyphs. Oh, hi, here's this detailed lineage of all of the pharaohs of Egypt. So archaeologists were able to track back and say, oh, no, these sculptures were from the reign of Hatshepsut, and wait, they're damaged. Why are they damaged? So that was just kind of that interesting, there's definitely some political power at play there, which is absolutely a reason why somebody may identify as a gender differently than what they're born as. Because power plays are a thing. They always have been. They always will be, for better or worse. But moving forward about 1,000 years, because between 1460 and 450, there wasn't really a whole lot going on that we have found yet. As we know, archaeology doesn't stop, research doesn't stop, history does not stop. And we're constantly discovering new things. But in 450 before Common Era, the Torah and Jewish religion, this is as far back as it's been documented thus far. It doesn't necessarily mean it started then, but this is where it's documented to. The Torah and the Jewish religion denote 6 genders. Again, keep in mind, 450 before Common Era. So really, really far back. Longer than many of our common ancestors who are alive, but still. So the 6 genders, Zahar, that term is going to be derived from the word for a pointy sword and refers to a phallus. And it's usually going to be translated as male in English. For those of you who want to know, they are available on my website for you to download PDF, so you don't have to keep typing. Nakiva, which is going to be the term derived for the word for a crevice, and it probably is going to refer to a vaginal opening. And it's going to be usually translated as female in English. Androgynos, which has its roots in Greek, which obviously the Greeks and the Romans were about then, but and doing their thing. So there's cross-pollination of cultures and language. It's going to be a person who has both male and female sexual characteristics. So this is where there's it starts breaking down how many references are made, because obviously the first two are going to be the two ends of the gender spectrum. They're the two binaries initially, and then everything after this is going to be anywhere in between. There's going to be 149 references in the Mishnah and the Talmud, which are going to be sourced from the 1st through 8th centuries Common Era, and which were written after the Torah to more codify the religion and the law codes. And then 350 references in classical Midrash and Jewish law codes, and that's going to be anywhere from the 2nd to 16th centuries Common Era. So very much prevalent through the time period that the SCA covers. You have Tumtum, which is going to be our equivalent to somebody who is non-binary. So a person whose sexual characteristics are permanent or obscure. 181 references in the Talmud, 335 references in classical Midrash and Jewish law codes. Ilonit, which is going to be a person who's going to be identified as female at birth, but later develops male characteristics at puberty and is infertile. 80 references in the Mishnah and the Talmud, 40 in classical Midrash and Jewish law codes. This is going to be your person who is going to be your female to male transgender individual, so someone like me. And then you have Sadis, which is going to be a person who is identified as male at birth, but develops female characteristics at puberty and or is lacking a penis. A Sadis can be naturally a Sadis, which is going to be Sadis Hama, or become one through human intervention, which is Sadis Adam. Something that's really important to know at this point is that the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, they were bringing back this whole concept of what's old is new again. They were doing surgeries at that point. They were doing gender confirmation surgeries.
Wow.
Yes. Definitely not.
That's kind of that's really interesting. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea.
Yeah. So that's why I'm really interested to find out about Hatshepsut, like how they presented, like if they had surgery at one point, because they have access to the mummy. I'd be really interested to know if there's anything anthropologically speaking, that can determine that, because mummies and scar tissue and things of that nature.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, you know, for example, the ancient Egyptians were, I mean, they had the first form of birth control by eating a plant. They licked the science and found out if it worked for them. So, I mean, they did. So there's no doubt in my mind that they had the ability and knowledge to sedate somebody and then do the things they need to do. It probably wasn't as technologically advanced as we have now in terms of our science and medicine, but they were able to do some things that could reflect the body with the soul, as it were.
One would hope we've advanced since then.
Well, one would hope, but you know, that's questionable in some aspects. But there are 156 for the Saudis. There are 156 references in the Mishnah and the Talmud, 379 in classical Midrash and Jewish law codes. So again, what's old is new again. It is personally one of my greatest things where somebody says, "You guys didn't exist then. This is all new." I get to smile at them and go, "No, actually, this says we existed a lot longer than you think." But it's just I love having done the research for this because it's fun. Plus, I enjoy research. So moving over, not too much further. Actually, yeah, jumping over. No. 50 years ahead, and in a different part of the world, you have the Hijra community. Like I mentioned, over in South Asia. They are first mentioned in the Kama Sutra. I can talk, which is written as early as 400 before Common Era. So one of the things to mention about the Kama Sutra is it is primarily known for being a reference for sensual and sexual health. It is not just that. It is very much a sacred Hindu text. It is very much it's not just this is how we make you feel good. It's not in the carnal sense necessarily, but also how do you bring about personal enlightenment? How do you bring about that personal sense of self and self-respect and identity? And there's a lot more to it than just the bits that encourage carnal pleasure, as it were. Again, one of the scholarly articles I read, the Hijra can be eunuchs, intersex, or transgender, and they've been part of South Asia's culture for thousands of years, which obviously we know because 400 before Common Era. Eunuchs are celebrated in sacred Hindu texts such as the Mahabharata and the Kama Sutra. They also enjoyed influential positions in the Mughal court, which is again part of that SCA time period towards the later period. But the Mughal courts had a lot of influence in India before all of the English came in and started bringing about colonialism. So that's a thing. And it of course was one of those subtle. Here we're gonna flip the bird to the English a little bit, and we're gonna still do our thing. Because yeah, which I know the Scottish Reaver's like, yeah. So I'm gonna cross that divide going into Common Era. So 203 Common Era. So not quite the height of the Roman Empire, but in the middle of the Roman Empire. Things are going all right. They're fairly stable. They're a world power. You have Elagabalus or Heliogabalus. So they were a Roman emperor who was born male, and by choice chose to live as female and chose the title of empress during her reign. So that right there is an example of that whole changing the story. And it's important to note the initial because of the context of this, but everything else talking about Elagabalus is female, is all going to be female pronouns. So Elagabalus was known to frequently wear cosmetics and dress as female. She also solicited physicians who could provide her with surgery to give her female genitalia. So gender, like I said, the whole gender confirmation surgery is very much a thing at that point. But again, finding a physician who was willing to do so is going to be the question. Because again, ancient Egypt was still kind of rolling around at that point. They hadn't been steamrolled by the English at that point. So they still had the pharaohs, and they were still doing their thing. And of course, the Egyptians, like I said earlier, they're really, really good at documenting all the things. So there are, of course, references of this is how you do this. Like I said, not the same as us. It was probably a little bit more crude, but the ability to do so was still there. And that was important for those that could find it. And besides, if the Empress asks you to do a thing, who are you to deny? What's important, though, about one of the other things that was important about Elagabalus is that she was a devotee of Helios. She was a devotee of Helios, but specifically the sect that she was involved with, they worshiped the feminine. And so it wasn't this strong masculine presence. It was this, no, we're going to embrace the power of femininity. And, and that was a thing. So that was her particular religion that she was interested in, which was a minor deity in comparison to the grand scheme of the Roman deities, was one of the minor ones, and didn't necessarily go with the flow of most of Roman society. But again, Empress, how are you going to deny the Empress what she wants? Another side note to Elagabalus is that she's not courtesan, but solicited. She solicited partners who were both male and female, and because again, who is going to deny the Empress? So that was also an interesting tidbit that didn't get put in the notes, but if I'm doing a gender and sexuality class, I'll usually toss it in there because it's kind of interesting information. Because essentially that minor deity is as part of that femininity, as part of worshiping and respecting and elevating that femininity, also encompass that sense of sensuality as well that is intertwined with that. So that was kind of cool. Moving forward about 350 years, 567 Common Era, you've got Saint Anastasia the Patrician. So she was a French noble who betrothed to somebody who was basically an abusive dick, and said no, was not interested in going forward with this union at all because this dude was abusive. He was known to be a jerk and just wanted nothing to do with him. But instead of going into the lower classes and being a servant or whatever, she's like, you know what? I'm also really, really interested in religion. I'm really interested in Christianity. I want to do something with that. So what she did is she went to the father of a local abbey and said, Father, I have this problem. I'm really interested in studying, I can read, I can write. I'm really interested in studying more about the faith, and I want to devote my life to Christianity, and I want to devote my life to the study of this. And also this guy over here, he's known for being an abusive ass, and I really don't want to deal with this. What can you help me out? So Father says, okay, here's what I'm going to do for you, my child. You're going to live. I can do part of this. You're going to live in seclusion, and we're going to put you in seclusion. We're going to give you robes. There'll be one brother or myself that will come up here and will bring you food and water, just to make sure that again, you're choosing to live a life of piousness. You're going to forsake everything else, and you're going to live in solitude and learn. And we'll come up and have discussion with you when we bring stuff up. And so they'll bring books, they bring food, they bring water, things for sustenance. So then when Saint Anastasia, so basically everyone in the abbey, all they knew is that there was some brother up in the mountain, up in this cave, that was living by themselves. That's all they knew. They're dedicating their life to Christ. So that's all any of the other brothers that were not in that trusted position knew. Just that there was some person up there that's doing their thing. So time goes on. There's, of course, this one or two people that actually know who this person is for identity purposes and whatnot. So Anastasia dies. This father, who has evidently outlived her, writes to the Pope and says, Pope, I have this devotee. I have a weird caveat for you, though. This person's female. And of course, bear in mind that where they are to Rome takes about 2 to 3 weeks to get there back and forth, even on horseback. But this canonization was so important because Anastasia had devoted her life to living without sin, or living in solitude and learning, and basically assumed this identity. They basically literally gave up their identity and their personhood as they knew it to do this thing. Partially so they could, like I said, get away from abusive potential lover, and also because they were interested in learning the scripture. I put them in here because of the fact that they willingly gave up their identity and they willingly lived as male. To everyone else outside of those two people, they lived as male, and that's how everyone knew them. There's this brother up here. That's what they're doing. That's their life. And also the fact that they were canonized within 2 or 3 months of their death, which is virtually unheard of. The canonization process takes years, if not decades. But because of the fact that the abbot felt, or the father abbot felt so strongly about this, and evidently so persuasive of a letter, documentation shows this person was canonized very quickly, all things considered. So that was that. So moving forward about 800-ish years, 750-ish years, you have Kalonymus ben Kalonymus. Kalonymus ben Kalonymus was a Jewish scholar who wrote Evan Bohan, which is a poem which discusses transitioning and being genderqueer. For those of you who are following along with the notes, it's going to be Appendix 1 as the full text, which, so specifically referenced for that, this entire poem talks about, so initially starts out talking about the fact that this person was born male, and then saying what a terrible fate this was for their parents, for the mother specifically, that you have this son who doesn't want to be a son, wishes that they were a woman, so that they could, wishes that they could be a good wife, that they could be a good mother to their children, that they could be everything that a good Jewish woman should be. So I'm trying to find a thing. So towards the end of the poem, it says, Father in heaven, who did miracles for our ancestors with fire and water, change the fire of Chaldees so it would not burn hot. You changed Dinah in the womb of her mother to a girl. You changed the staff to a snake before 1,000,000 eyes. You changed hand to white and the sea to dry land. In the desert you turned rock to water, hard flint to a fountain. Who would then turn me from a man to a woman? Were I only to have merited this, being so graced by your goodness? If that's not talking about gender transition, I don't know what is. Because, I mean, literally, it's cut and dry. It was translated, so the poem was written in the 1300s. It was later translated by a modern rabbi, Stephen Greenberg. And the website that I found this from, it's basically a reference point of Jewish scholarly materials that were ingrained in their culture. And there's an entire discussion about like what this means and whatnot. And no, it's pretty clear as day. This is somebody daydreaming and saying, wow, I'm not happy with this. And I really wish that the Lord God above would do something to change this, like he's done so many other miracles. And so that, again, that whole concept of the soul aligning with the body and everything being intertwined and whatnot. So the other thing too to note about this time period, specifically the 1300s, we're starting to see the rise of the Inquisition, which goes into the next thing that we're going to bounce over to. So 1300s, we're starting to see the Inquisition rise up. We're starting to see the very dogged, if you don't believe in Christianity, you're a heathen. If you are not following the gender binary of male and female, you're a heathen. You're going to be persecuted. There's penalties for that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So 1354, Italy. Got Rolandina Roncaglia. So she was a prostitute who identified as a woman, was born male, and had very feminine features. Totally fine, whatever. One of the articles I read, and he continually frequented the prostitutes of Rialto in bed, and going to the public baths with them. And meanwhile, he hid his member on both sides so that no one ever noticed, and they all very clearly considered him a female. So I pulled that out specifically because it's talking about the concept of passing, which I know obviously in modern society is kind of a bunk concept. It is what it is. But in the confines of Italy, of Europe, for lack of a better term, it was important whether you passed as male or female, because again, like we said, the Inquisition's ramping up. And we have this drive for, the Crusades are kind of winding down, the Inquisition's ramping up, and we have this drive for you have to identify one way or the other. So being able to flow between or one or the other is really, really important for people's safety if they are gender nonconforming. So Rolandina was prosecuted as a prostitute by the Lord Doge in Venice and condemned to be burned. So she basically, again, flipped the bird to the local Doge and said, yeah, no, I'm female, the same thing, I identify as female. The same scholarly article that I got the initial quote from had also mentioned that, even that quotation mentioned that the fellow prostitutes that she was working with, they gave her clothing, they taught her how to put makeup on. They basically did as much as they could to reinforce that concept of, no, you're our sister, you're female, and we're going to help you as much as we can. Because, I mean, there's that solidarity there. Solidarity means you stay alive longer. But yeah, the Lord Doge tried to prosecute her, and she's just kind of like, no. You're like, no, this is who I am. Just, no. She was condemned to be burned. She was actually released because because she was so strong on her conviction for her identity, they couldn't prove anything beyond her being a prostitute, so she paid a fine and was released. But she was threatened with death, so which is still kind of one of those important things to note. So yeah.
Kind of amazing that they couldn't prove, considering she's a prostitute.
Right, and there's that and that was the other thing too, is that
there's that whole concept of other people know, right?
Right. Well, it's that concept of other people know, and that she would have had to out her lovers, which I'm pretty sure were some of the people that were kind of high up in Italian society, because that was a thing. That was a thing for people to pass the time.
Don't ask to tell.
Yeah. We'll go with that. I drink my juice here. So, kind of still in the same time frame. So France. As much as we joke about France being France, they during the 1300s, again, where we have the Crusades ending, the Inquisition's ramping up, they were a bastion of freedom. Like I said, as much as we joke about them now in modern civilization and society, they had their perks at that point. They, the very laissez-faire attitudes that they have actually serve to benefit and to stimulate culture. That said, we have Christine de Pizan. So Christine de Pizan was a Venetian Italian who was a poet and author at the court of King Charles VI of France. So in 1405, the King Charles was also one of her patrons, and basically said, "Hey, Italy's getting real hinky down there. Come up here. We'll give you someplace to live. Maybe you'll meet somebody which she did eventually get married to another philosopher. But we'll give you some place to live, and we'll support your research." Because while you are not specifically, because she was Jesus, She was also a theological. Golly, I can't think today. My brain is shutting down already. I'm sorry. Um, she did theological philosopher. I can talk today. I apologize. It's sleep. Sleep is a thing. So she wrote the book of Three Virtues in 1405. During this book that she wrote, she theorized that souls have no gender, but yet they inhabit masculine or feminine forms based on the will of God. She also argued that the souls of masculine and feminine individuals are created in God's image and are equal to one another in all things. She also theorized that a person's gender can change by will of the spirit in accordance with the will of God. From the book, the composition of one's body is arranged so as to reflect the gender form in conformity with one's gendered offices. If the duties change, the essence has to change, which means that the constituents have to be arranged. So this is my personal favorite thing to use for any person who is conservative Christian, modern, who says you go against your identity and your life violates my beliefs. Then I get to go, actually, nope. There's Christian theologists that say, no, here, this is person said this, we have this. And this was actually, and Christine is mostly known for her feminist work, but the fact that she also explored the concept of gender identity and the fact that gender transition as a concept is something that is ordained by God. That's super, super important to note in here, because a lot of folks who practice modern Christianity, take that for what you will, say that people who are LGBT or LGBTQ are heathens and all this other nonsense. There's a lot of in the Middle Ages there's a lot of this whole reassurance that no, y'all are fine. Of course, depending on where you were. Like if you were in Italy, that's where Italy and Spain, the Inquisition was going rah rah rah, no no no. But if you were in France and England, less so in England, more so in France, those thoughts were discussed, and those theories were put to pen. Case in point by Christine de Pizan. And she's there is a complete anachronist about her. I ordered it. I haven't gotten a chance to read it yet, but
Which one is it? Do you know the number offhand?
Actually, I do ish. Give me 1 second because I have it in my email. Give me like 2 seconds, and I will check that for you. Dude. Sorry, I don't have on hold music, so you're gonna listen to me ramble. Or if anyone has questions for me right now.
Oh, sorry.
Actually, one of us maybe go get some water real quick.
Yeah, go for it and grab water. I mean, we are towards the end.
Hydrate.
Yes, hydrate is good, especially right now. Keep those nasal passages moist.
That's gross.
Really? This is a thing. I didn't even read that this winter. Interesting. All right. Okay, so it's going to be complete anachronist 162.
I'm sorry, what was that?
162. 162.
160?
162.
162. Okay, thank you.
Like I said, I haven't gotten the opportunity to read it yet because my work life's a little bit busy, and that's where I do a lot of my research. Because the whole working at a university thing means I get access to the library.
I've got 1,000 of them, so I'm going to look later.
Oh no, totally. I got to skim it very briefly. I haven't sat down and read it, but it was kind of it seems pretty cool. I just haven't got a chance to read it fully yet. but yeah, so so her big thing was feminism and LGBTQ rights, even though she was ahead of her time, so to speak, in terms of that. Whew. So then you've got 1395, 30 years further. Again, the Inquisition is still raging because we can't do anything halfway. John Reichener, which is called Eleanor, they have documentation for both names. So she was a person who called herself Eleanor when she was called in the Constitution, and she maintained that identity throughout the entire trial. She may, oh no, I'm sorry, she was the one that I was mixing up the people. So Rolandina Roncaglia did get burned at the stake, and she was the one that said basically, "I am woman, hear me roar, and you aren't going to take me. I'm not going to change my statement." Eleanor was the one. I apologize. Was the one that maintained her identity throughout the court proceedings, and she may or may not have been charged for the crime as a way of not acknowledging her gender identity. If I don't acknowledge it, it doesn't exist, because that works so well for her. So well. And then she worked as a seamstress for 5 weeks prior to the Feast of St. Michael's. So she, again, because this is England, the concept of the gender binary is very, very strong there. Even now, it's very, very strong, even though societal pressures have lessened some. But so there's this whole concept of, I'm a strong Englishman, I'm a strong English woman, and there's a lot of pride in the gender binary. So the fact that Eleanor was working as a seamstress, was provided clothing, was provided hair and makeup to re-emphasize and to emphasize her gender identity is a really big deal. Again, Middle Ages going on, driving that Christian religion, and again, since the thing with the thing, since persecution's happening.
The thing with the thing. That's a heck of a thing to walk away.
Gosh, so since the Inquisition was happening, you had all this huge drive for persecuting anyone that's other than Christian and female or Christian and male. Never mind the fact that women really didn't have any sort of personhood at that point, because men are all powerful in England. But she worked as a seamstress, and they tried to persecute her and couldn't do it because, sorry about you, nope. So that was a thing. And then so this is all over in Europe and Asia. There was one reference I found in a scholarly article. Actually, it wasn't an article. It was a whole journal that came out about. It was over last summer. It was a scholarly journal that came out discussing basically queer influential people. And so I found a new reference, which I was really excited about, in the New World over in the Americas. So this person's name is Thomasine Hall, is from 1629. I'm not sure if that was a birthday or a death date, but the reference was from 1629. She lived in Colonial Virginia, possibly was intersex, and testified in court. And the article specifically referenced a legal document saying that Thomasine testified that he was both a man and a woman, with the Middle English intact, which is kind of a cool thing to see that legal documentation and pull that out of. Yeah, I know. I'm keeping going. So I'm still doing more research into that because this is the first mention of the Americas that I've seen thus far. I've slowly been going through Europe and Asia, and I've slowly been starting to migrate more resources over to the Americas, both North and South. Because one of the things I obviously don't mention right now, but I know it to be true, is that there are several Native American religions that have the concept of the two-spirit, or the concept of someone who is transgender, specifically transfeminine, who is going to be your going to be your shaman or your holy person. And I haven't done extensive enough research yet on that to include it in the documentation, even though I know it's a truism.
They aren't always trans feminine.
True. No, that's true.
There's a variation of both.
No, I know, but I'm saying a lot of the things I have seen thus far have been referencing trans feminine, but you're absolutely right in that it encompasses the spectrum, which has been really, really cool and very affirming for folks who identify in any fashion. And again, it depends on the tribal culture as well, depending on
Right.
what it's from.
Because they weren't all cool with it.
Right. No, that's true. There were some that were very much the hyper masculine, hyper feminine. This is a thing, and we're going to ostracize anyone that's not in the binary. But like I said, I'm at the tip of the iceberg with that particular sect of research, just because
Gotcha.
Again, following the trope of the SCA, where I haven't even really dipped down into Africa too much either. I'm still doing more research on them too, because it's very similar too, where you have, aside from the mention of Egypt, you still have a lot of the tribes where given that there are tens of thousands of tribes in Africa, there's a good number of them that still have trans and gender nonconforming individuals who are regarded as holy people. I haven't gotten the research down yet. So other things. I mentioned some of the other things because they are important to us modernly, more, and also the context of the class and just how we interact with one another. So the use of cis in reference to gender is a really big one. So
what? I'm sorry?
The use of cis, so cisgender. So first and foremost, it's not a slur. It's a descriptor. It is specifically so it was the term the prefix. So it originated at the same time as the prefix of trans. They originated in the 1880s as a way to describe chemical bonds in organic chemistry. That's where it originated. And well, let's be honest, humans are part of organic chemistry, whether or not we'd like to admit, we're partially carbon. We fall into that category.
Mm-hmm.
So the prefixes trans and cis were adopted by the LGBT community as a way to describe non-trans individuals in 1994. So that language itself is very, very new. As we know, language evolves, and that's a thing. It was not originally intended as a pejorative term or an offensive term, but it was only intended to be used as a descriptor. Like I said, language evolves. So during my lifetime and the course of me transitioning, I've watched it be just a descriptor to an offensive term, and now it's just back to a descriptor. Like we're trying to reclaim that term and try and go, no. Really, if I'm mentioning cisgender, it's because I'm trying to describe someone as not being on the trans umbrella or under the trans umbrella. That's all that is.
Right.
All it means is that
The way I've always understood the use of cis and the way that I use it is when my gender identity conforms with the biological assignment at my birth.
Correct. And that's what I was getting ready to mention, so that's perfect. No, that's exactly right.
Like I'm a cis male.
Right.
So I was assigned male at birth, and I identify sociologically and gender identity as male. So that's
Correct.
cis.
Yep. Basically, everything is in alignment. That's all it is. Trans literally means that something is out of alignment or it's not in direct alignment. So that's literally all it is. But I mention it because it is socially relevant to us, and because of the fact that our demographic in the SCA is broad. We have everyone from very young individuals to more experienced in life individuals. I'm trying to be somewhat PC as I'm going through, just a little bit. But we've got some older folks that have some different ideas of how the world should be perceived. And I generally don't use the terminology. This is literally the only time during the class I actually use the term because of the fact that I need to mention it because of the social relevance. But I make a point of not using it just because the focus is on trans and gender nonconforming individuals. So gender identity and sexual orientation, because this usually inevitably, it actually came up in the first time I did the class, so I put it in here as a note. So they are not mutually exclusive. one's attraction to another is independent of their gender identity. However, however, the terms may change if a person transitions and their attractions remain the same. It's a thing. It happens. Um, Once somebody becomes a lot more comfortable with themselves, they may start exploring other avenues of their life, and that's totally okay. It is what it is. It's their life. So one attraction terms may change. So, for example, someone who identifies initially as a straight male prior to transitioning, as long as their attractions remain the same, they would likely identify as a lesbian when their gender identity transitions to female. Their attractions haven't changed, but their identity has. So the terminology changes with it. So it's a thing. It is what it is. Like gender identity, sexual orientation is on a spectrum, obviously, as we've discussed before, as other people have discussed. Sexual orientation can and does shift for some people as they become more self-realizing. Like I said, I use myself as an example a lot of times because, well, I have no problem I have no problem disclosing things about me. So, like, for me, mine absolutely changed. I initially came with, when I was 18, I came out as bi. And then I went in period of discovery, I identified as lesbian for a very long time. Then I started transitioning and started re-examining my attractions to people and going, well, maybe not. Maybe this isn't a thing. Of course, all the terminology around me was changing at that point too. So we're seeing the advent of pansexualism, being pansexual, and all of these different variables of how people orient themselves. So as I'm starting to transition, I'm like, well, that doesn't quite work. Oh wait, hi, you're really pretty, and I want to negotiate having some personal interaction time with you. So I reevaluate, and it's like, no, I identify as pansexual because
That's literally how you flirt, isn't it?
no, it's not actually. It's not. It's not. But no, it's not. Depends on the context, and what the intention is. But no, I like right now. I identify as pansexual. Like, I think people are pretty. I think people are cool, and like there's many things that set off like why I like somebody. So, but it's that whole concept of as I've become more comfortable with myself and everything is kind of shifted into alignment as much as it can for right now. I'm a lot more happy. I'm a lot more confident. And it's like, oh, hey, I can actually go explore some of these feelings I've felt, and it's very freeing, as it were. So at this point, I got nothing else. If folks have questions, the floor is open.
And I was just going to say there, you were saying that as you were kind of figuring out, realigning your own identities, you said language was also kind of evolving and changing. And do you feel like that was really helpful, having a breadth of terms, having people understanding more commonly some of these different ideas, some of these different concepts and self-definitions? Was that really helpful for you?
For me, absolutely. Like, I was very lucky in that. So kind of, again, using myself as an example, the first time I ever met somebody who was trans-identified was in 2004, when I started attending Northern Illinois as a freshman. I got, I was kind of escaping a not so great home life because mom took me coming out as an offense. Because as I mentioned earlier, we are, my family is very deeply ingrained in Kankakee, which I'm literally related to half the town. There's some flavor of cousin or aunt or uncle, literally anywhere I look in that town.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if they're not related to me, they're a family friend of my mom.
Right.
Because my mom grew up there, and that's her hometown. It's not mine. I was born in Los Angeles, but that's her hometown. And she brought, my sister and I were raised there because be around family and be around family friends. Another important thing to note with that is that my grandmother was one of the founding members of the church we went to for the longest time. I walked away from the church when I was 12 by choice because I had issues with how things were being run. But mom and I necessarily didn't get along towards my my teenage years, because I was starting to realize I had personal autonomy, and I started exploring the concept of sexuality and gender. I did. I mean, 2004 was also the year that I got involved with moved to DeKalb to go to school at Northern, and got involved very rapidly with the LGBT organization on campus, PRISM. So I got involved with them, became their webmaster, did some other stuff with them, and so I also had my first drag experience then. It was the first time I'd actually gotten the ability to play with gender. So I was their homecoming drag king.
Nice.
So yeah, it was kind of a really cool. It was a really cool thing to experiment with gender that I hadn't really thought about. But one of our other officers was trans, and that was literally my first time ever meeting someone who was trans identified, and specifically trans masculine, and just this concept of wait, hold on. So my worldview got exploded and re-put together that first semester. It was
wait, this is an option moment.
Right, exactly. It's like, wait, this is a thing. This is a thing.
Huh. Mm-hmm.
So that that was definitely a small catalyst, and then life happened. I had to put that aside for that point, but then revisited it, several years later, where one of the people in my circle started transitioning, or a couple people in my circle started transitioning, and I started playing with gender, and I started revisiting how that was making me feel. I mean, initially I thought that I was being kind of a poser, like, oh, I'm just doing it to follow the crowd, and then it's like, no, actually, no, this is the thing I want, and history has kind of written itself at that point. But yeah, I mean, but definitely as I went past that concept of, man, I feel like a poser, to no, this is legitimately something I want. It opened up a lot more freedom for me to start, and I kind of started exploring my sexuality a little bit more before that, but it definitely it released the floodgates for me to kind of start, pondering about and bouncing around and trying to figure that out.
Move some of those concepts into the forefront and into the conscious
Right.
actions and thoughts, rather than just kind of a subconscious weight.
Yep. And also, at that point too, redefining what consent meant too. And especially being in a college environment too, we have a very now especially we have a very heavy focus on consent, which I love. I love the fact that we're asking each other, hey, can you have recognizing the autonomy of another person. It's super important to me now. So yeah.
I have a question in regards to in historical, on some history lessons that you've heard. Some of the females have identified as males just to get, because of the patriarchal societies they belong to. For example, Milan, the Milan movie type thing, that they identified as a male even though they were a female.
Right.
Would that how you say that would be transgender wise?
So the context of the classes, I do not just trans individuals, but I do gender nonconforming.
Okay.
For whatever the reason.
Yeah.
So, and of course there has to be that documentation of it too. I mean, Mulan, there's still so much ambiguity with the documentation there, that I feel very I love the concept of the story. It's something that I grew up with, and I still love it. And I'm looking forward to seeing the movie soon. I'm not gonna lie. But,
well, that was just an example, trying to put a name to it.
But I mean, in the context of Hatshepsut specifically identified as male for political power, because she was frankly the best suited ruler, and in fact, Egypt was incredibly prosperous under Hatshepsut's rule, but it was primarily done for political influence. But I still include it because that was a decision that she chose to do. She chose to make. She willingly gave up her femininity for the betterment of her people. And it's contrary to what, and I kind of wish that Gwen hadn't logged off because this is more things that she could speak to. But it goes against the concept of identity and that self-realization, but at the same time it does. I mean, the motivations for people are going to change depending on what their environment dictates. So, I mean, you kind of see that now modernly with trans folks transgender non-conforming individuals who want to express themselves more authentically, but can't because of their environment that they're in, whether it be because of a socio-political climate, or because of its family, or because of the threat of violence. There's so many things. There's so many reasons.
Well, for example, TV show wise, Bosom Buddies, where they dressed up. It was a 1980s sitcom where two people dressed up as female so they can get into a female only apartment complex.
Tom Hanks' big break.
Yeah. You and I are old enough to actually understand what that show was.
Hey, I'm not. Yeah.
I'm there with you. I remember.
But that's what I'm saying. I mean, so for financial reasons, they could have easily done it in conforming from male to female or vice versa, I would think as well. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for non-conforming.
There are. I mean, and again, it's that whole, because of the fact that I'm choosing to research the time period of the SCA, one, it's very broad. Two, there is that lens of colonialism there. And it's like, so what exactly? Yeah, it's like I kind of have to shift my perspective a little bit while I'm reading stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not there to ask these people. I'm still working on the time turner, but but I mean, since I'm not there to ask them, I have to rely on what's being given in documentation. Because, I mean, we're still finding more period resources, like in the flesh, as it were. I mean, case in point, in Nigeria, there's tens of thousands of I can't remember the number exactly, but there's tens of thousands of period original documents that have been in a library for thousands of years, that have been taken care of through all of their times of war and famine and all this other stuff, that have just been discovered by the rest of the world. So the fact that we're still consistently finding stuff, I mean, that narrative may change. I don't know. But as far as what we have now, I have to keep that perspective in mind. Anything else? Nothing?
I'm not quite sure how to phrase the question. Kind of an interkingdom anthropology question. So for anybody else who is on here who doesn't necessarily know, I'm a landed baroness in Madison, Wisconsin, essentially, in North Shield. And North Shield as a kingdom has been amazing as far as acknowledging individuals and how they want to identify. My spouse is recently identified as non-binary, and so is developing a female persona as well. And some events will be Baron Tucson, and some events will be Baroness Athelina. And we've received just a ton of support, people saying, can I help sew her a dress? Can I, which pronouns do I use on which day? And just really super supportive. But one of my concerns always is that, I'm a little biased. I think my kingdom is awesome. Are there any particular areas, subsets, activities? Is there anything that we need to watch out for where I might kind of walk in blind and think, oh yeah, everybody's awesome, everybody's cool. Whoa, what was that all about? Is encountered out there in other kingdoms that are, maybe not as safe spaces?
I mean, so obviously most of us can speak to the mid-realm. I know that Jen can speak to Edenveld because that's where she's from.
Aidenville.
I wasn't going to call him out, but okay.
Hey, I wasn't being correct.
Hey, I was in the Barony of Turiska there, so I understand.
Oh, awesome.
So sorry, my apologies. I'm a transplant.
It's all good. I
am too. That's Aidenvelt's where I Haid is where I started, but Aidenvelt has the real. Or sorry, no, we're talking different place. Sorry.
We're talking where there's dry air,
Yeah,
everything's
right.
dry. Yes.
And I mean,
Right. Aidenville's Arizona, right?
Arizona, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the big war is in Aidenville, even
Yes,
for
Cayenne.
Cayennes. Yeah. So okay, yeah, it was the right place. I'm sorry, I'm a transplant from Cayenne.
So, so speaking for the mid realm, there are certain states that are questionable. There, Indiana is, specifically southern Indiana. Like, there's clumps of Indiana. So, like, case in point, like, I got asked to go down to Riven Star last year to their event, Three Saints, and teach this class live,
Mhm.
because they have an older population that was having a little bit of difficulty adjusting to a couple of their bearing members transition,
Mm.
and they just need some help along. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm 110% down for this. I can do the travel. It's not a problem. And it's so the whole concept for this class came about because, which might actually kind of explain that a little bit too. The whole concept for the class came about because, in the middle of 2014, 2015, we're seeing all of this, and even still we're seeing this rah, let's persecute those who are gender nonconforming. As we saw sociopolitically outside of the SCA.
Right.
As we know, there is no division between the SCA and the ESCA. There is none. Like, as much as we'd like to pretend there is not. So, that said,
I know.
the concept for the class is, well, okay, how can we educate people? So this class initially started off as just the etiquette part. It was just the etiquette and the interactions. There was no history. The history part came about a year later after I started working on it, because I wanted more to add to the class. And also I kind of love being able to say, no, here's your history. You're wrong. That admittedly is that. But, so, I mean, like I said, I personally won't go to Gulf Wars. But then again,
And
my situation.
that's part of what prompted my question is, like, is there specific areas, cities, activities, like what prompts that feeling? Because we've both been and enjoyed it, but that was before.
So that was before. Also, we are living through a time where we have an extremely conservative socio-political climate, and I actually talked to one of my mid-realm cousins a couple weeks ago, and they asked me, because we were talking about Gulf Wars and if it was going to be canceled or any of this other stuff, and I'm like, I can't go to Gulf Wars. And he's like, why? I looked at him like, I am a trans person of color driving through the middle of conservative Hicksville, Mississippi, where a lot of those towns, even though we don't officially have sundown towns anymore, there are still sundown towns. There are still sundown towns in Illinois. I have reservations about even going to one of our local events because of that. So for me, it is physically unsafe for me to go when I'm seeing all of the Confederate flags in the trunk.
I'm a little ashamed to admit I have not heard the term sundown town. What is that exactly defined as?
So the sundown towns are during the
Most of Louisiana.
Well, no, specifically what it is they are towns that during the civil rights era, and even now so, they're essentially towns where if you are a person of color, doesn't matter if you're Hispanic, Black, whomever, if you are not a Caucasian identified or appearing individual, there's basically a target on your back the moment the sun goes down. Because after dark, a lot of things happen that people can't trace.
Yeah.
If you're not familiar with it, there's a document called the Green Book, and it kind of relates to that too, where it was the Green Book was essentially, because now we're getting into modern history too, it ties back to everything because it affects our SCA life.
Right.
The Green Book was a series of annual publications made by African Americans, where basically denoted places to stay. Like places to stay that were safe. Let's say I was going to drive down to New Orleans, I would need a place to stay each night that is going to be safe for me and anyone that I'm traveling with, because otherwise I would, there's a very real possibility that I could be lynched or I could be attacked just because of the color of my skin.
Right.
If you add in the additional facet of being transgender, and while my documentation says that I'm male, not everyone has that privilege because of the state they were born in.
Right.
There are more than a few states that still have laws in the books and are making it more difficult, in fact, for trans and gender nonconforming individuals to have
Change their
primary
official identification. Yeah.
So, yeah. So for me, at least personally, I mean, obviously your mileage may vary, but
Mhm.
Gulf Wars is not on the table for me at
Be
all.
aware. Yeah.
As far as that, like, I mean, it's just kind of knowing your climate. Like, anywhere, I can't say anywhere south of I-80 because it's not entirely true, but there's this band in Illinois between I-80, south of I-80 to north of I-64, which is kind of St. Louis area, where I get real twitchy about driving, like either really early in the morning or real late at night,
Mhm.
because, like I said, there's a lot of there's a lot of big trucks, Trump banners, and possibly guns sitting in the back. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're
So I
looking,
was just going to share that from a perspective, being out in Ayton Belt, and I'm fairly widely traveled actually within the society. I go to Artemisia a lot. I go to Caid, and I go down here. I'm happy to say that I've, for the most part, seen most people be very inclusive, whether you're talking transgender, non-binary, gender fluid. The thing that I noticed that most people actually have difficult with is if they meet them post coming out, if you will.
Mhm.
Great, oh, that's wonderful, great, thank you. But I do watch people in the society struggle with the idea of, you've been my friend for 20 years, and all of a sudden now you're telling me that you're gender fluid, and they're struggling with that concept. And that, for me, I haven't experienced it in a geographic location. I've kind of experienced it everywhere I go.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I would say
You
that I would agree with that. Like I watched a friend of mine come out, is a peer, came out after they received their peerage, and try and navigate that when you've got people that have known this person for 15, 20, 25 years,
Mhm.
and it's a very dynamic shift. I mean, it's a hard shift.
Yeah.
It's that whole, even with the advent of Facebook and the ability to gradually see the progression, it still is really hard for a lot of people to grasp. And that's why I kept referring back. That's why I kept referring to the concept of adopting a pet,
Mhm.
where it's kind of that you're not quite happy with the pet's name, so you change the name and you get used to saying that name. Sometimes you
Yeah.
may screw up and call them the former name, but then you quickly correct yourself and you move on. And that's really how that should be handled. I mean, it's not that we're adopting our trans and gender nonconforming friends. I mean, in some cases we kind of are, because some of us are kind of protective of our people, because we are. But it is very much that same mental process that happens there. Or like if somebody, or somebody changes their persona name, or somebody has a new nickname that's added. Yeah, it's in that similar vein.
Mhm.
Well, and sometimes too, it's just paying attention to those little changes and then politely asking. Like I had a work colleague who I noticed their what they signed their email as changed. And I just, mailed back, said, may I politely inquire, which pronouns would you like me to use?
Yep.
Here's my background and here's my pronouns. And this is, I'm sensitive to this because my partner is non-binary, and they were just thrilled to pieces that somebody had noticed and that it was safe and okay to be themselves genuinely in their work setting too.
Yeah.
So
We actually incorporated at Liberty Mutual, our signature includes preferred pronouns.
nice.
Oh, that's awesome.
We updated throughout the whole company, we updated our signatures to include comfortable pronouns.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
So one of the things I'm actually going to correct so again, that concept of language is evolving. Less so on the preferred, but just pronouns.
Correct.
This is how I wish to be.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And it's a subtle change, but and it doesn't really bug me too much, but for other people, because again, it's that whole concept of, even if we are not landed baronage or a peer, we all have the opportunity to be a leader. And it's simply by showing courtesy and respect to our fellow person. That's the whole leading by example thing. So
I'm
You're right.
sorry. I'm double checking because I'm not hearing everything that you're saying.
Okay.
You said dropping the preferred, correct?
Yep.
Gotcha.
So it's just your pronouns. Like, so one of the things I
Just
do
pronouns. It's not preferred pronouns. Got it.
correct because it's right
Because
because
it's who you are, not who you prefer to be.
correct.
Right. It's not a choice, it's acknowledgement of what's right. My apologies. I think I do make that slip from time to time. I'll work on taking that out of my language. Yeah.
What's like again, like, for better or worse, hanging with you folks from North Shield,
Mhm.
I've showed, like, and specifically the folks from Yara, I've started shifting some of my language, so using partner and spouse as opposed to wife or girlfriend. I'm talking about my partners or whoever I'm involved with, and admittedly, like the first time I did that in like on a Facebook post, my partner's like, "What?" Like, and kind of freaked out a little bit, and I'm like, "No. There's no one else added to the polycule. It's just the people you know about.
Right.
It's just that I'm using this terminology because I'm trying to be more inclusive."
That was so helpful to me right now. You have no idea, because I've been struggling with talking to my daughter. Her partner has recently transitioned.
Oh, awesome.
Is from Hannah to Aiden.
Okay.
And so, but when I talk to people about it, I go, "Oh yeah, my daughter's her Aiden." But that helps a lot. Like, I'm like, "Oh, now I can talk about this. Like, yeah, I got words. It's perfect."
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, using terms like partner or spouse, it invites it invites a conversation rather than definitively saying. And ultimately what we want, ultimately what I try to do is, like, I kind of going back to the reason for the class, is instead of going rah 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 rah, thou shalt do this. Having the class invites conversation. It opens, and that's why I say, like, there are no dumb questions. Ask a question. I'll give you an honest answer. You may not like the answer, and if I can't answer it, I'll try and find out. That's my general policy for everything. But doing the class, though, allows people. It basically creates a safe space for them to ask questions that they normally wouldn't get the opportunity to, or that they might be uncomfortable asking other people. So that's why I do the thing.
Thank you for doing the class. It's very useful for a lot of people, and
It's my pleasure.
building that community that we want to see,
I try. So
Even though I have like background in all these pieces, I still feel like I learned something from this. It's really good that you are doing this, and I'm glad that you've expanded it to the historical aspects, because I live in a universe with family members that are not accepting of reality, and it's good to have that historical background of to combat some of those ignorant statements that have happened and that I may face.
So one of the other fun things with this is that I'm in the very slow process of so, like I said, this is a living document. This is a living document. I'm in the process of gathering materials and condensing and whatnot to write a complete anachronist. So I'm in the process of writing one. So this is my living document. These are my notes. Or there will, of course, be more information, and I'm always compiling. I'm always researching, because there's always new stuff coming out. That is the nature of history and research and science. So I do more research, I do more things, and then, like, the class has greatly evolved from when I first did it. I mean, when I first did it, it was a one-page document. There was no works cited page. Now there's a works cited page that keeps growing. It's almost taking on a life of its own. So, like, I very much, like I said, I'm the kid of a teacher. I very much believe that education and knowledge should be free and open to all. I don't have I have caveats for teaching the class format that I have established. And my big thing with the class is that I specifically request that the class is only taught by someone who's trans or gender nonconforming, because I feel it's important that this story, so to speak, is told by somebody whom it affects. So
Representation matters.
yes, and also too, it also gives that person a voice. Like I said, right now I'm not able to do as much travel as I'd like to. So thus far I've had somebody present it in Kingdom of the East and Kingdom of Kaid, I think.
California.
No, sorry, it was Antir. It was Antir and the East have. I've had members of the conforming community that reached out to me and said, "Hey, can I present your class? Because I know you're not able to." And I said, "Sure. Here's my caveats. Have at." So, my biggest thing is to I have a working document that I use, but my PDF of my updates are always available on my website. I update it regularly. So, because like I said, education is power, and education and knowledge are power, and I like promoting that as I can. Also encourages people to email me too. So.
Now, are you going to be teaching the class in SCA events live in person once this disaster passes?
Oh yeah. As I'm able to, I try and balance my time between going to be on the fighting list, because I'm a crossover fighter. So I'm a crossover fighter. I'm an archer. I do all the things. I do A&S, obviously. So, and then also too, being a landed coronet, I also have obligations with that, where the Crown may have meetings, or maybe I need to talk with, or maybe there's conversations that need to be had with members of the populace, or maybe I'm going to other kingdoms, North Shield, and acting as an ambassador or whatnot, and teaching, and teaching up there from time to time. So,
well, if you feel like going south of I-80, Baroness Wars is always available for you.
So Baroness Wars, I have a love-hate relationship with, mostly in the fact that I hate the time of the year that it is. No, not for the reason that you're thinking, because it's move-in weekend and it's a blackout day for me.
Oh man.
For the investiture for Honda and I had to finagle some stuff with that to make sure I was there. I got no sleep before the investiture. I was very, very tired.
Well, I remember that, but I'm just saying they'd allow you to go I-80, and above 64 to actually go into.
I can travel. I can travel anywhere. It's just a matter of where do I feel safe. I mean, if I'm staying on campsite with SCA folks, I'm not too worried about my safety, honestly. I either have my weapons, or I've got several other people around me who've got sticks and swords. I'm good.
Yeah. And North Shield's also available if they want to come down to Baroness Wars as well. That would be as an ambassador. That would be very nice. So.
Well, thank you. We actually looked at the possibility of that, and it sounded like fun, and there was the whole ooh, hey, I'm a Baroness now. I should get a car full of people and bring them down to Baroness Wars, and and there was some potential hijinks, but it did not line up with the schedule and demands of family and other events and such. But it's still on my radar as a good event that I'd love to make it to.
You should. It is a lot of fun, and there's some massive shenanigans.
Yeah, especially among the Baronesses. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So I gotta head back to family though, to kiddo and spouse, and check in, see how they're doing, and take my time as primary parent on duty. So
thank you all for taking the time out of your afternoon, because I know that
Yeah, thank you.
even though we're all kind of bound to home for the most part, there are still other obligations we all
Stuff to do. Yeah.
I definitely appreciate you all taking the time out of your day.
And then also thank you for doing it, because then now that adds to my discussion page for my class, transgender wise, because it's you could have timed it better if you tried. So I think you had me in your wavelength there.
So I am going to look at doing this class again next month and actually getting it on the RUM calendar, because I have failed to do so for this iteration. But I'm going to try and get on the docket for next month. So, I mean, feel free to pop back in the class, because, I mean, the class always changes depending on who's attending.
Mm-hmm.
So, tell your friends. And then
Will do.
I'll also try and get this uploaded either to YouTube or something, or either on my personal web space too, so that people can stream it and listen to the stuff. So, thanks, folks. Have a good rest of the day and stay safe out there.
Thanks so much. Nice meeting everybody.
My pleasure.
Bye, Sammy. I'll see you later.
Hey.
Love you. Bye.
Hey.